At age 65, most people are thinking about retirement. Harland Sanders was starting over. His restaurant had failed. The new interstate had taken away his customers. He was living largely on Social Security. Most people would have accepted defeat. Instead, he climbed into his car with a pressure cooker and a fried chicken recipe. A recipe so famous that decades later, some would claim it had finally been discovered. And from those unlikely beginnings, he would build one of the most recognizable food brands in the world. This is the remarkable story of the man we know as Colonel Sanders. Harland David Sanders was born in Indiana in 1890. Life dealt him hardship early. When Harland was only 6 years old, his father died. His mother had to work long hours to support the family, leaving young Harland responsible for caring for his younger brother and sister. Necessity forced him into the kitchen. By the age of 7, he had already learned how to prepare meals for the family. It was a skill that would ultimately change his life. Harland left school after the 6th grade. For years, success seemed just out of reach. But the lessons he learned as a child and his love of cooking would stay with him forever. Over the next several decades, Harland Sanders tried just about everything. He worked as a farmhand, a streetcar conductor, a railroad fireman, an insurance salesman, a tire salesman, and even operated a ferry boat. Some ventures succeeded for a while, others ended badly. But one thing remained constant: Harland Sanders refused to give up, even though he was still searching for his life's calling. In 1930, Sanders operated a Shell service station in Corbin, Kentucky. To attract motorists, he began cooking meals for hungry travelers. At first, there wasn't even a restaurant. Customers simply sat around his own dining room table. Word spread quickly. Eventually, demand became so great that Sanders opened a restaurant across the street. Known as Sanders Court and Café, it became famous for its southern cooking. Country ham, biscuits, steaks, and especially fried chicken. Travelers from across the region began making special trips just to eat there. Harland Sanders had finally found something he truly loved. But Sanders faced a problem. Traditional fried chicken took too long to prepare. Customers often had to wait nearly half an hour. Sanders believed there had to be a better way, so he experimented and experimented. Eventually, he discovered that a pressure cooker could cook chicken much faster while keeping it juicy and flavorful. At the same time, he developed a special blend of herbs and spices. Exactly what went into the mixture would become one of the greatest mysteries in food history. His chicken became famous, and business flourished. Despite the title, Harland Sanders was never a military colonel. In 1935, Kentucky Governor Ruby Laffoon awarded him the honorary title of Kentucky Colonel. It was the highest civilian honor in the state and recognized Sanders for promoting Kentucky cuisine and hospitality. Years later, Sanders decided to embrace the title. He began dressing almost entirely in white. The now famous white suit was inspired by the white jackets worn by Southern gentlemen and restaurant professionals, and Sanders believed it projected cleanliness, hospitality, and a touch of showmanship. He dyed his mustache and goatee white to match. Paired with his black string tie, the look became unmistakable. Harland Sanders had transformed himself into Colonel Sanders, and in the process, created one of the most recognizable personal brands in history. For many years, Sanders Court and Café thrived. Then, everything changed. In the 1950s, the construction of Interstate 75 diverted traffic away from Corbin. The steady stream of customers disappeared. Sales collapsed. In 1956, Sanders sold the restaurant and much of his property. At 65 years old, he found himself nearly broke and living largely on Social Security. Everything he had spent decades building had vanished. Most people would have retired. Harland Sanders chose to begin again. Fortunately, Sanders had already seen a glimpse of what was possible. In 1952, several years before he sold his own restaurant, Pete Harmon, who operated a restaurant in Salt Lake City, Utah, agreed to use Sanders' chicken recipe. It became the first Kentucky Fried Chicken franchise. According to legend, it was Harmon's sign painter, Don Anderson, who coined the name Kentucky Fried Chicken. The restaurant proved enormously successful, but after losing his own restaurant in 1956, Sanders faced a choice: retire or begin again. He chose to begin again. Armed with his pressure cooker and his recipe, Sanders set out across America. He drove from town to town, visiting restaurant owners one by one. His proposal was simple: use my recipe and pay me a small royalty for every chicken sold. Not everyone said yes, but enough did. Slowly, more restaurants joined, then dozens, then hundreds. What had started with one restaurant in Salt Lake City and one man with a pressure cooker was becoming something much larger. And before long, Kentucky Fried Chicken was spreading across America. By the early 1960s, Kentucky Fried Chicken had become one of the fastest-growing franchises in America. By 1963, more than 600 restaurants were serving Sanders chicken. In 1964, at the age of 73, Harland Sanders sold the company for $2 million. But he wasn't ready to disappear. Instead, he became the face of the brand. Dressed in his trademark white suit, Colonel Sanders traveled the world promoting Kentucky Fried Chicken. His image became famous, and his smiling face soon appeared everywhere, on signs, on buckets, and eventually in countries around the globe. As Kentucky Fried Chicken spread around the world, so did the legend of Colonel Sanders' famous blend of 11 herbs and spices. The recipe became one of the most closely guarded trade secrets in the food industry. Different suppliers handled different portions of the mixture, and the original handwritten recipe was reportedly kept locked away in Kentucky. For decades, people tried to uncover the secret. Countless copycat recipes appeared. But in 2016, a surprising discovery made headlines. Joe Ledington, Colonel Sanders' nephew, revealed that he had inherited a scrapbook that once belonged to Sanders' wife, Claudia. Inside was what appeared to be a handwritten list of herbs and spices. According to the Chicago Tribune, the recipe called for salt, thyme, basil, oregano, celery salt, black pepper, dried mustard, paprika, garlic salt, ground ginger, and perhaps most intriguingly, white pepper. Had one of the world's greatest culinary secrets finally been uncovered? But according to reports, there was one problem. When food writers tested the recipe, the chicken was remarkably close. Yet something was missing: monosodium glutamate. Better known as MSG, after adding a small amount of MSG seasoning, taste testers reportedly found that the chicken became almost indistinguishable from Kentucky Fried Chicken's original recipe. And KFC itself later confirmed that MSG is indeed used in its original recipe chicken, though the company has never revealed exactly how much. So was the secret finally revealed? Maybe, maybe not. Because while millions of people have enjoyed Colonel Sanders' chicken, only KFC knows for certain whether that weathered piece of paper contained the recipe that changed fast food history. And until someone can answer that question with absolute certainty, the legend of the Colonel's 11 herbs and spices will continue to live on. But perhaps Colonel Sanders' greatest legacy wasn't a recipe at all. It was perseverance. Because before there was Kentucky Fried Chicken, there was simply Harland Sanders. A boy who learned to cook because his mother had to work. A man who spent decades searching for success. And when life forced him to start over at 65, he refused to believe his best years were behind him. Armed with little more than a pressure cooker and a handwritten recipe, he built one of the most recognizable brands in the world. Proof that sometimes life's greatest chapter begins after everyone else thinks the story is already over.